Good morning, members and officers and members of the public joining us for the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee on the 12th of September 2023 in the County Hall, County Council, Dorset Council. Could I just remind members of the use of the microphones. Please remember that when you use your microphone, you must press the button to switch off your microphone after you've spoken, as the system only allows one microphone to be in use at any one time. The red light means that your microphone is on and the camera will automatically pan towards you. Please also note that the microphone should not be moved. Please speak directly into the top of the microphone and avoid turning your head away when speaking. Chairman to remind all members and officers to introduce themselves when they speak. And if I go to the item 1 on the agenda, please, apologies. Ms Watson, do we have any apologies, please?
Chairman, apologies from Councillors Heatley and Trite.
Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda, the minutes. To confirm and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of July 2023. Members, are you in favour of approving the minutes? I see no dissension, so I'll take those as approved. Thank you. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Ask if any member has any declaration of interest if they wish to make. If so, the action you wish to take. Does anybody have a declaration of interest? No? Okay. If one comes up during the course of the meeting, if you can make that known, please. Thank you. Agenda item 4, Chairman's update. We have a sickness absence note, which is being provided by Mr. Chris Matthews, Head of Human Resources. Mr. Matthews, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. So the ask was to provide a Chairman's briefing note just to provide an overview on sickness absence levels within the Council and an overview of activity being taken forward to support the workforce in remaining fit and well. In line with the national picture, the pandemic introduced unprecedented challenges for Dorset Council, causing a significant disruption in workforce attendance. The implementation of remote working, lockdowns and quarantine measures directly influenced absenteeism rates. In 2020, the sudden shift to remote work led to a significant reduction in short-term absence. However, the pandemic's prolonged nature resulted in an increase in mental health-related absences and burnout, resulting in an increase in long-term absence. Whilst levels of short-term absence have increased to pre-pandemic levels because of increased social connection and the continued prevalence of COVID, long-term sickness absence has reduced, equating to roughly half of overall absence compared to 2/3 of absence in 2021. Mental health-related absence continues to be the biggest contributor to long-term sickness absence across most directorates, with the Place Directorate having proportionately more musculoskeletal-related long-term absence compared to other directorates, which is not unexpected due to the physical nature of roles within that directorate, for example, waste collection and highways. Levels of attendance are monitored as part of the Council's performance management framework, with appropriate commentary provided to directorate level to provide a better understanding of cause and action. Supporting employees to remain well and at work is a key priority for the Council, as reflected by the inclusion of specific actions in this area within the Council's People Strategy Delivery Plan. Each directorate has developed an employee wellbeing plan, working closely with employees to identify activity that can be taken forward to help people stay well. This includes a range of activity, including delivery of specific mental health training and increased promotion of routes to support. Having skilled, experienced and confident managers in place to support colleagues is crucial, and a range of opportunities to develop skills and experience in this area have been developed and introduced. The Council's Leadership and Management Development Academy, accessible to all managers in the Council, includes a range of modules to help increase awareness of good practice. The Council's HR advisory team have also delivered face-to-face sessions with managers in areas experiencing high levels of sickness absence to ensure full awareness of our policy and procedure and help increase the confidence of managers in its application. A key element of the Council's attendance management procedure is the need for an interview to take place when employees return to work from any absence. This ensures that employees are well supported and that any actions can be identified and implemented to help ensure attendance can remain as high as possible. Levels of return to work interview completion are monitored as part of the Council's performance scorecard, with current completion rates sitting at 86%. Work is underway to validate the data and identify areas for improvement. That's the end of the briefing note.
Thank you, Mr Matthews. Is there any members that wish to ask any questions or make any comment? Councillor Andrews?
Well, thank you very much for that brief but very good report. My concern is always around back to work interviews and the consistency of back to work interviews. So I'm just wondering, are there any specific areas where those back to work interviews are not taking place? So you mentioned 86%, I think you said. Because there needs to be a consistent approach to back to work interviews with it being done and part of the junior and senior management structure to ensure that happens.
Thank you, and I don't disagree at all about the importance of return to work interviews. There are no obvious areas where recording of return to work interviews is deemed to be significantly lower than other areas. One thing we are doing, though, is validating the data, because sometimes we have difficulty capturing the completion of return to work interviews for those employees that work more remotely, who don't have access to the same sort of IT systems as typically office-based workers do, where it's far easier to record the completion of the return to work interviews. So we have got a piece of work underway at the moment, ensuring that the data is validated and we've got better systems in place to capture the data in the first place. And that will give us that better assurance.
So back to work interviews, is it all done the same? So have you got a pro forma that you go through on a back to work interview? So if that is the case, most people have got one of these that I've got in front of me and got Teams. So even if they're working in remote conditions, they can still get on this and have a back to work interview. So I'm just asking the question if that happens.
We do have a standard model, and we encourage the use of that standard model. The difficulty, and understand what you're saying, the difficulty is more in line with when we have frontline operational services, for example, waste services, where people are returning to work, and the ability to capture the data in that type of environment is a little bit more challenging, and that's what we're trying to ensure is corrected.
The next speaker is Councillor Haynes, who's joined us online.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Councillor Jill Haynes. I have the portfolio for transformation and corporate development, which includes HR. I just wanted to raise the fact that while Ms Matthews also pointed out that, you know, we had considerable problems during the pandemic, that COVID isn't over. We're still getting a lot of people with COVID, and whilst you know, we're trying to chase down the numbers and sickness, obviously we don't want people who have COVID to be coming to work. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, and I think it really is important to encourage people who aren't feeling well to test and not come in and give it to others. That was all I wanted to add to it, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. It's a point well made. Thank you. Councillor Canning.
Thank you. Vice Chair, Councillor Andy Canning. I just wanted to ask if there is reliable and timely data from other similar authorities that we're able to make comparisons between the experience of our staff compared to neighbouring people like Somerset, Devon, that sort of thing.
We are in the process at the moment of establishing a benchmarking network with other local authorities. We do share information across the South West, but we want to broaden that to include more national data from other local authorities so we can compare. Of course, benchmarking has its challenges at times because it's that sort of comparing apples with apples element. So you may look at another local authority and there's some near us who we might deem to be comparable to us, but they deliver services in different ways, do not have in-house delivery of services such as waste and highways, and that means the typical level of sickness absence might be slightly distorted. But we are looking at benchmarking. I know, having had a conversation with the chairman in preparation for this meeting, we are lined up to present a further report to the committee in November, I believe, on turnover. But it provides us with an opportunity to include more benchmarking in there as well, and we can bring the sickness benchmarking into that.
Is anybody else with any more questions? No? Okay. Mr. Matthews, thank you for the report. And I think if you can take back to your department how appreciative we are as a committee about the dedicated and professional officer corps that we've got. And I know that they've been under extreme pressure with the new authority setting up and everything else, and COVID was the last thing we all needed, which is a point well made by Councillor Haynes. So thank you for the report. Okay. I look forward to seeing you in November. Thank you. So if we go to agenda item 5, public participation. Do we have any questions, Ms Watson?
No public questions on this occasion.
Thank you. If we go to agenda item 6, questions from councillors. Do we have any questions from councillors, Ms Watson?
Again, no questions from councillors on this occasion.
Thank you. So if I move to agenda item 7, the property strategy and asset management plan, the annual update. And the recommendation in this is that the Scrutiny Committee review and comment upon progress in achieving the actions identified in the property strategy and asset management plan. And 2, that Scrutiny Committee notes the progress to develop a new strategic asset management plan. We have the portfolio holders with us, Councillor Andrew Parry, I beg your pardon, and presenting is Mr Julian Wayne, who's new into the post at the moment, and he is the Strategic Property Advisor and will provide an overview of the report. So, Mr Wayne, welcome to the committee, welcome to Dorset Council. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And for those of you who haven't met me, the title does what it says on the tin. I was asked to come and provide some support for John Selgren and Pete Hopkins across the property piece, particularly on Weymouth Regeneration and Luff, but also in this sort of area. And so I guess in this instance, I'm probably quite proud to be a substitute for the departing Mr Hopkins. I think I'd probably characterise your update, Chair, as a holding report, because, of course, as the report sets out, the Council is embarking on a new strategic asset management plan to update the plan from November 2020, principally to make sure that it targets better the priorities within the council plan, the key commitments to make a positive impact on Dorset, and secondly to improve its connection to the obligations such as the climate and ecological strategy. So the report is very definitely monitoring the progress on the old plan, but it is a fact that you are now moving towards a new and improved version. And that's timetabled, as the report says, for the end of this municipal year. And no doubt you'll give that due consideration in due course. Taking you through the report, I mean, the report makes it clear how important assets and regeneration role is in supporting the council's strategic priorities. And that's a role that I think it's fair to say is being embedded and strengthened on a more or less daily basis. And certainly one of the purposes of renewing the strategy is to do that. As an overview, over the last 12 months, there has been a lot of work, including with consultants' public intelligence, to develop the strategic thinking, the governance and the due diligence, not only within assets and regeneration, but this is a council-wide issue. Assets and regeneration effectively exist to serve the wider council. And as you can see, the governance process has been updated. There's been a new options appraisal tool, as well as a business case template. Rationalisation of property work continues. There has been a series of rapid asset reviews to identify assets for repurposing or disposal and indeed reuse. And in due course, those proposals will come into the political process for decision. And the corporate landlord model, probably better known, I think, now as delivering effective property services, implementation of that is really underway, with the library service being the first group of assets to transfer into this model, again targeted for the spring of next year. And I think the key thing to say here is that the coalition of the willing, the link between their strategy and the council's property strategy is very clear, and it shows how effective this will be when it's done and delivered properly. And the ongoing work throughout the organisation and with SLT colleagues indeed, to make sure that the principles of effective property services and their service to the corporate council is embedded and worked through. And you can see there at 110, the report makes explicit reference to that. As I said, the report makes clear that the progress in the action plan, which we'll turn to in a moment, is monitoring of what's gone on against the old strategy, and there's a progress update and next steps. The financial implications I will only comment on to the effect that, of course, done right, the strategic asset management plan can have a significant effect on the council's finances because it allows for rationalisation, development, disposals if necessary, repurposing, and it can deliver to you both savings and receipts, income, and as we've said already, help deliver those priorities. And of course, individually, the financial costs and benefits of each of those reports is approved and reported on an individual basis through the governance and approval process. You have adopted your new strategy. The ongoing work will link the strategic asset management plan very closely with climate and ecology team. To some extent, the whole purpose of rationalising property is to deliver better ecological and climate benefits. And it's a very important set of implications there. Just a few words on the climate decision wheel, both by way of explanation and also to just make a point about those two bright red segments that refer to major negative impact. Essentially what the wheel is a tool to measure the effects of your initiative on the climate and the ecology, and particularly the carbon neutrality, and measure it against those targets. And essentially what happens is that when you are bringing an initiative forward, there is a set of questions that is answered, and they relate to those things in the segments: transport, green economy, food and drink, waste, etc. And by answering those questions, you essentially arrive at the impact. And that's set out both in the table and in the wheel in the report. Specifically why the buildings and assets and energy are showing negative impact on this particular one, just to be very clear, this wheel is really about developments individually. So for example, if you were building 6 houses, let us say, then you would go through and you would get an answer, and let us say that these were going to be built to passive house standard. Clearly you would have a better impact than if they were being built in more traditional manners. Because this report is your strategic report, it doesn't really work very effectively for that. The report actually says it's anticipated the climate decision wheels will show better outcomes related to buildings and assets. Well, I think, had I been the author of that paragraph, I might have said they will, because actually that's the whole point of it. And therefore, those reds will become greens in due course. So hopefully that's some degree of explanation of that. Just turning to a few headlines in the action plan, you'll see that the first set of the report, to be honest, repeats much of what we've said in the cover report. But it is worth noting that you've had, over the last couple of years, a fair amount of change and a fair amount of turbulence in the team. And I think it's probably invidious not to pretend that that may not have had some slowing effect on the progress. But that progress is nonetheless broadly positive. I think I'll just make reference to a few points for you. You'll see that, as we've said, asset reviews continue. There's work with libraries, with children's centres, with the day centres, and just starting work with the depots, looking at how those assets can be best aligned to the service strategies and plans, and whether they can be either improved for better service use, which is likely to what has happened in the libraries, fitting their strategy, or whether there is opportunities for surplus redevelopment, reuse, and in the fullness of time, I think around the family hubs and the adults, there is quite a possibility that some of that may come through the process. On the agile working, as you know, there was a phase 1 of the Dorset workplace, and obviously time and tide waiting for no man. The need to look again post-COVID, post-further change, and currently a utilisation study of workspace, particularly within County Hall, and an employee survey to understand the employees' needs for work, how they wish to work, is taking place, and the results of that are due shortly. I think I've touched enough on the corporate landlord, effective property services stuff. I think we have a route map for that now, and the key issue is going to be about delivering it. The other thing that is worth saying is that you'll see at Action 4.4c, looking at the Technology Forge Business Information Management System, Council is currently implementing the cloud-based property database. It's targeted to be complete next month, and this essentially brings all your predecessor council property data into one location. The important thing about this is that, okay, that's your database, but then how you then move into operating the property services on a better base digitally, and how that links to what I understand is the council digital transformation process is the next step. So what that's really about is concluding the bringing together of the data and then moving on to the next phase as to how you're going to work and how you're going to work better. I think the final thing just to draw to your attention, Chair, is the One Public Estate piece. And you'll recall that post-COVID, the work with other public sector bodies on One Public Estate rather fell away. I think it's fair to say that renewing it is somewhat in its infancy, but nonetheless the Dorset agencies, if I might so describe them, are meeting together now to look at opportunities and look and see where those can be brought together to both improve public service and to make better use of land and assets with resource availability as appropriate. And of course, it won't escape members' notice that that is a link back to the whole issue of what you're doing with your various towns and settlements and how you're going to approach the property assets of that, because clearly how the public agencies work and how they arrange themselves in those areas is a big component of that. I don't think I've anything more to draw to your attention in the report, Chair. Obviously take questions as ever, and as you say, you're recommended little 1 and little 2.
Thank you, Mr. Wayne, for taking us through that. We have the portfolio holder for assets and property, Councillor Andrew Parry. Would you like to add anything at this point, Councillor Parry?
Thank you, Chair. Just slightly unusually for appearance before the Scrutiny Committee, of course, is that the Executive Director isn't available with us today, and of course the report's author has left the organisation, but it would be remiss of me not to thank Pete Hopkins for his great work in Dorset Council and wish him well in his time close to home with Eastleigh. I hope you understand that this report is not a finite report. It's more a case of work in progress report and an update to members. I know, talking informally with some of you, with elected members, you would like to know more about specific pieces of property and assets in other locations, and that would be better served in a forum, particularly if it relates to your own ward, rather than in a strategy meeting of this sort of discussion in front of a Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. And I would agree. We have a great debt of gratitude to Mr. Hopkins for all the work that he did, and I was very sad to see him go, like many councillors. An excellent officer. So I'm now going to move to invite any non-committee members if they wish to ask any questions or make any comment. Do I have anyone? No? In which case I'll move to questions from the committee members. Councillor Took.
I just wanted to ask about the report on page 22, Project Delivery Action 7A. current surplus freehold and leasehold assets that have been identified for disposal or termination to be completed between March to June 2021. Its status of ongoing and partially achieved. Could we have a little bit more detail as to what's actually going on in that area, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So there is a list of surplus assets that have been identified for disposal. In all honesty, I think some of these are, I'm not sure it's the right term, but fairly historic in the sense that they have been on that list, some of them since before your foundation in the present council, and officers have been working through them. And as you can see, the status report is that it is still ongoing. In governance terms, when that work is complete, authority is sought from the right place, be that cabinet or through the appropriate delegation. So they all ultimately end up as being the subject of a separate report. So it is ongoing because obviously it wasn't achieved in the timetable, but that's essentially what's going forward. And I think picking up on Councillor Parry's point, I think the detail of some of those is what I think members are after in some instances. There are some commercial confidentiality considerations to be taken into account. And I think, as Councillor Parry says, officers would be more than happy to provide advice and information, but it's probably not in this forum and with this report.
Thank you for that. I'm just a little more details as to why something that should have been completed 2 years ago is still ongoing. What have been the problems there? There's clearly been issues to resolve. It's not clear what those might be or what the issues actually are. Is it resources? Is it lack of historic data as to what those assets are? What's the problem?
Councillor Parry.
Perhaps if I can answer Councillor Tuke's point on some of my observations since coming into post in May. So, for example, we know that one area that we've identified for disposal is currently a matter of probate on the part of leased land associated with the site. Another example may be that we're dealing with something still from the disaggregation of Christchurch Borough Council area under the old Dorset County Council, and that required sort of tripartite agreements in how that was resolved. Other scenarios may be there was a particular piece of land in the North Dorset area. I know that the local member was very angst about its being placed on the market under the planning permission terms granted previously, but still felt there was concern about that, and that seemed to go on for an extended period of time. They tend to be, and there's another one I'm aware of where there's we're waiting on some documentation from a utilities company in order to complete the legal process. Where there is a list available that we can go through with you, and where these are still standing as sort of work in progress, there are known reasons for it, and we're doing our best to resolve those wherever possible.
Mr. Wayne.
I mean, Councillor Parry, with his command of the detail, has probably answered this question better than I was going to anyway. But probably it's worth just saying that the complexity of some of these disposals does probably mitigate against easily set targets, because quite often in the property field, it takes as long as it takes because of the things that come up and crop up. And Councillor Parry's given some examples of that. So that's not to say clearly there isn't a natural desire to time limit these things and get them done, and we understand that. But events do interfere in some of these matters, and these are complex business, and some of them, by their very, as I use the word, historical nature, are even more complex. So that's the sum of it.
Did you wish to come back, Councillor Took?
Just briefly, thank you for the answers. Could you give us an idea as to how far through the job is? Say we've got partially achieved and ongoing. Are we 10% through or 99% through, or somewhere in between?
Very crude estimate. I'm envisaging the report in front of me, but I would say probably somewhere around about 60%. But that's not the sort of estimate I would want to be quizzed on in a court of law. That's a crude estimate for the benefit of being helpful.
Okay, noted. Thank you.
Thank you. And just following on from Councillor Tooke's question, would it be fair to say that in part that there's part of the problem has been the fact that obviously we had COVID, that everybody could have done without, which no doubt slowed the work up, but also that there's been quite an upheaval within the officer team in property and assets. There's been several reorganisations that we read within the report.
Well, I think there's no question that COVID will not have helped. And I mean, the report does make reference to the level of change, which again will not have helped. So, I mean, I think it would be invidious to pretend that those weren't factors, but equally, probably I'd be reluctant to rely on them 100% either.
Thank you. Any other members with questions? Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies if I've missed this in the report, but you may be aware that in the old East Dorset jurisdiction, there are approximately, I think it's about 130 small assets that can range from a roadway through to parks to little footpaths that, for reasons that are lost to the mists of time, East Dorset owns as assets that have been transferred, and these have fallen into a state of limbo where they currently sit, I think, with assets, although some of them arguably should be with highways, and effectively what this has led to is me as a ward member needing to intervene to actually get works actioned on them because they are falling in between the cracks. I must admit that when I have thrown a tantrum, those assets have been looked after appropriately. But I was wondering where they fit into this scheme. Now, I appreciate these are minnows in terms of the scale of the project you're looking to touch on, but they also represent quality of life impacts to residents in the forms of their road not having the potholes filled or the garden fence that's falling down into the public footpath kind of stuff.
So I think the answer to that is twofold. I think the first thing is that to some extent it does depend on the size of the asset. I mean, you made reference to some bigger ones as well as the little ones. If it's the bigger ones, then the whole purpose of the asset rationalisation process, the review process, is that each and every asset in the fullness of time will come through that process, will get an assessment, and the ward members will be consulted and involved on then what ultimately happens to it. So if it's of something of reasonable size, then it's fair and square within this process, gets considered, reuse, redevelopment, disposal, whatever it is. Clearly, your example of a park is likely to stay to be a park, but not for me to prejudge the outcome of reviews. I think some of the smaller stuff that you refer to, then I think they fit more within the effective property services, the corporate landlord model. The task is to make sure that they're in the database that I talked about a few moments ago, and the task is to make sure that the maintenance regime is covering those and dealing with those, and that they are all caught up. And I think it's fair to say that many organisations will experience some of what you've described. Not every small footpath, not everything will be on the maintenance regime. It is sadly often a matter of data collection. And I'm talking here about authorities that have been in place for many, many years, not one such as yourself that's had a relatively recent formation. It is really a ongoing due diligence task to make sure these things are in and they are dealt with. And I think the contribution of local members and the public in flagging these is very important. It's also important to recognise that some assets will need to be prioritised, and there are limits to the budget process. That should never be used as an excuse for not doing something that needs to be done. But obviously, the more you put in, the more you maintain, the bigger challenge you've got. So that's not me saying it shouldn't be done or anything like that, but it's just saying there's probably a prioritisation process as well. Sorry, Chair, that's quite a long and slightly rambling answer, but hopefully it covers the points.
Barry, I believe you want to come on that as well.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, like yourself, as a former East Dorset District Councillor and a Dorset Councillor who represents a ward in the east of the county, I think is probably the correct way of describing it these days, You will, of course, like me, recall that there was great intentions in the run-up to the creation of Dorset Council for asset transfers of small parcels, land and associated buildings to town and parish authorities. And some of that work did take place during the shadow council period and continued into Dorset Council. But the reality was that we had a very short period of time, a very short window to create Dorset Council as a legal entity, and we had to be operational as safe and legal on day one. So some of those things did have to take a lower priority. However, there were opportunities to ensure community use of them via things such as lease agreements at tenancy and will basis that did permit, if you look at some of those youth club buildings and the like, for the community use to be re-established or to continue in those forums. But I dare say that there are still the final lease agreements are still in draft form and probably will work their way through the systems in due course.
Councillor Brown, did you wish to come back?
No, thank you very much for those answers. But I felt it is important to raise due to it being a small but having a large impact on the community. And I appreciate that in the grand scheme of things, the department are focusing on a very wide and extensive project. But I wanted to make sure they were included, and I'm satisfied. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Yeah, and as Councillor Parry says, we did scrabble over the line to get ourselves safe and legal with the view that we'd always be going back to tidy up the affairs. And then COVID again, coming to the fore, didn't help if that matters. Could I just ask, are all the directorates included in the strategic thinking moving at the same pace on this, and is the timetable on track?
So I think all are involved and all are working hard to get this together. My remarks earlier about the children's services and adult services, as well as libraries and the depots, for example, all working and all involved. So I think the answer is everybody's involved and moving forward. I think this is one where I think that to say the timetable is on track is always quite hard in these areas, but certainly I see no reason why there shouldn't be a report before you as timetabled in the spring.
Thank you. I just want to move on to the professional consultants public intelligence that were appointed, and I'm not sure what information or what data they had to work with that this committee didn't have, and their decision that this work was to be done, and did the members know who made that decision that the work was to be done by them, and would the members actually see that report in the future? I don't believe the members knew that work was being done, so I'm presuming it was the senior leadership team that appointed it. And as I say, I'm just wondering if we're going to see that report in the future.
Difficulty, Chair, on that, because their appointments certainly predated me, and it would be wrong of me to say with any certainty as to who or how they were appointed. And similarly, the release or otherwise of their report is not really in my gift. So I think I'd have to take that one separately and come back to you on that.
Thank you, Mr. Blaine. I'll defer that back to Councillor Parry. And I appreciate, Councillor Parry, your new post as well. So if you can't answer it, perhaps it's something that can go back to this committee at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions.
Sorry, Councillor Andrews. I'm going to Councillor Parry first, and I'll come to you. Thank you.
Yeah, it was purely to give that reassurance that, yes, as an action from this committee, we could take that away, and we will have discussions with the Executive Director upon his return, and perhaps pass a note to you as Chair of what may be permissible to be put into public forum regarding any reports.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. Councillor Andrews.
I know this is a strategic document we're going through, but my question is there any assets that have been identified, and what is the value of those assets, and when are we starting to start measuring against those assets that are being disposed of? So that was my first question, or repurposed. And my second question is the strategy ensuring we're getting value for money from our assets that we are responsible for maintaining, i.e. leased assets, etc.? If we're not getting for value money, are they going to be identified for disposal or selling or whatever we want to do with them. And alongside that, if we're not considering doing that and people are responsible for maintaining those assets, what inspection regimes in place to make sure they are maintaining those assets on a regular basis?
Before I bring in Mr. Wayne, if I could just add to that as well, the Public Intelligence Review supported the process for the decision regards future use of surplus and vacant properties, but what, as Councillor Andrews, I've got concern as to what part members will play in that decision making, and will members have any say in what happens to those assets, whether they are disposed of, repurposed, because we've already seen that there's been some dealing with assets within the council authority that members haven't had knowledge of. Indeed, in the cabinet meeting not so long back, there was a member that was making it clear that about a decision on a selling of a piece of land that member wasn't happy with. So I'm just wondering, going in the future, as to how members, we always said that members would be fully involved within the assets, within their wards and within their areas. And I just wondered how that is going to pan out in the future. As Councillor Andrews, I've got a worry around that. Thank you.
Perhaps if I may pick up the political points before I hand over to officers to respond on the operational side of things. I think when we talk about value, one of the things that I'd like to expand on is actually how do we go about weighing social value of asset? Because we obviously generally look at things in a commercial perspective through the lens of, is this an asset that we would sell for a capital gain, or would we put it out in some lease form to generate a revenue income to the council? But actually in that mix has to be at some point you say, actually, this is going to perhaps have a capital cost to the council or a missed opportunity of a capital receipt, but the social capital gain from it outweighs that benefit significantly, and therefore that's our justification for it. But how you show that in terms that keeps our accountants happy, that would be one for Councillor Suttle to answer and not me, I'm afraid.
Mr. Wayne.
So, yes, thank you. In truth, the whole purpose of this review process that is set out in the Strategic Asset Management Plan is to achieve exactly what the Council is asking, to look at, is this particular asset still needed? What function does it hold? What is it costing in maintenance terms? Is it fit for purpose? And then go on into the issues of is it better disposed of, redeveloped, repaired, whichever those answer is. So the concern he expresses is entirely central to this process. So is the aim to get value for money? Very much so. The inspection regimes are currently being strengthened and making sure that the council complies in all respects, because that's really important and becoming more so as days go by. I think the best way I can characterise what public intelligence is saying is that, and they are, I guess, your outside critical friends, if you like, and they are saying, yes, this process is the right process you should be aiming for, and making it work on this basis. Councillor Parry is quite right, of course. Value for money means a number of things, and it has to be set against it, but there does come a point where a building is just not fit for purpose and you have to deal accordingly. The beginning of the question was, have assets been identified? The answer is yes, they are going through the process. You've made reference yourself, Chair, to some of the assets that have been through Cabinet and similar meetings. Obviously we can in due course top those up with what's been sold against the value of assets, and provide you with what information you would like in due course. I think that's a worthwhile thing to look at. And yeah, I mean, my understanding is that you have indeed been promised that ward members would always be involved. I know if Peter Hopkins were still here, he would say, I have indeed promised them that, and sometimes we let ourselves down. But it is true that that is the aim, that ward members always ought to be involved in the disposal use of the asset. I'd like to think that I could persuade you that you should look at the technical matters as well as the political matters, but then I might be naive despite my advancing years.
Thank you, Mr. Wayne. I can assure you Scrutiny will look at everything. Could I just move to, we talk in a report about a property consultant, Montague Evans. I just need to ask as to how they were appointed and are they the only consultant that we're using? In the report, we refer to a consultant, Montague Evans, and I just wondered whether they were the only property consultant that we're using and how were they appointed?
My understanding is that Montague Evans were appointed through a procurement framework. And did you say, are they the only one that we're using? No, there have been a number. There's been 3110 who have been doing some work. And of course, we've talked about public intelligence Montague Evans have been principally associated with the Rapid Asset Review. I haven't been party to the procurement of all of them, but my understanding is that, generally speaking, Dorset's practice is to go through the procurement framework route, with the advice, obviously, of your procurement teams.
Thank you, Mr. Wayne. Councillor Took.
Thanks. On page 26, Appendix 2 talks about the corporate landlord. The idea being that ownership of assets is centralised, management of them is centralised, and they are then used by service. Sorry?
Sorry, you're not speaking to the mic.
I thought people could hear me. No? The corporate landlord takes ownership and management of the assets, service departments use them. That's an ongoing process. And as the report says, there are clearly issues potentially within there over who is responsible for which aspect of the asset, either the department using it or the corporate landlord. How's that actually working in practice? And is it proving effective?
I think the best way to answer the question is to use an illustration of the library's work, which is the most advanced, and potentially housing, which will be next off the rank. So if you take the library's example, the model that libraries and assets and public intelligence, who helped us with this, have arrived at is essentially one of complete transfer, because libraries really want to have as minimal involvement as possible with the property aspects. They want to concentrate, and their strategy, as I understand it, is very firmly in this direction. They want to concentrate on doing what the library service does. And I have to say that by and large, I think that's the right thing to do. But, as I said in my opening remarks, assets and regeneration is a corporate service. It's the service of the council. And therefore, it shouldn't necessarily assume that everything fits all. It isn't a control mechanism. Corporate landlord is a service mechanism, not a control mechanism. So the next one we're starting to talk to housing about, well, of course, that will be different, won't it? Because the requirements of a housing service are not necessarily those of the same as those of a library service. Because, for example, there is within housing a management role, and an important management role. And therefore, let's take a particular example. So let's say repairs ordering. The way repairs are ordered may be done differently by a housing service than it would be done in other aspects. And similarly, the nature of the contractor and their timetable and their targets may be different as well. So I think what we're saying now is that we will be moving to a service approach with the right aspects of the corporate landlord to serve not just the departments but the council as a whole. And that is not necessarily best served by what I might call an extreme version, which is one size fits all and the council covers it all. And my advice to you would be that, yes, I think that will work. I mean, I have seen the most extreme control versions work too, but I don't think that's going to be your long-term future here. So I think it is a tailored or a correctly balanced version to achieve value for money and the best level of service.
Thank you. The difficulties arise, as you say, because there are so many different types of property, uses of property. So we need, are there actually user agreements between the corporate landlord entity and the service users so that there is a clear and defined breakdown between who is responsible for what and how those assets are used?
So, I mean, historically, I believe there have been, but I wouldn't want to be held to account for my certainty on that. But certainly that is what we are moving to. We are moving to a position where you say, right, assets and regeneration are doing this, the service department is doing that, or better still, the council as a corporate body needs this, the service department is doing this to contribute to it, and assets and regeneration are doing to it. So we're certainly moving to that. But because I think anything you've got written from the past is likely to be historical. My understanding is there has been, but I think they are somewhat out of date and bewhiskered.
Councillor Took, you content with the answer?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much. And yeah, I understand many of the problems we face are due to fine historic reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Alford and Councillor Fry that both wish to speak. While they're not on the committee, we do have a position within the agenda for non-committee members to speak, but because this is such an important agenda item, I am going to allow you both to speak. But in future, I would appreciate if you could speak at the relevant time. So I'll go to Councillor Alford first.
Thank you, Chairman. I just really want to follow up Councillor Tuker's last point, perhaps ask the same question, but in a slightly different way. Because I agree with the notion that all the property professional functions should be concentrated in one organisation, as it were. You do want to have your expertise together. But I do want to make an observation about service departments. And what I've discovered this in other organisations at various times, that service departments start doing maintenance jobs when the central function ceases, from their point of view, ceases to function. So I think we've got to recognise that there is an important cultural and morale issue here in terms of the practicalities of the way that work is done. Not the quality of the policy, but it's the implementation. And I do believe that the central property function should be able to offer a service promise, say this is our promise to you in terms of our performance meeting your needs. And I think that would go a long way to help. And I think it'll need monitoring in the future as well. I think if we don't want complaints by service departments, because if that happens, they'll start doing things themselves and you've lost your policy.
Thank you, Councillor Alford. Mr. Wayne?
I mean, 3 brief comments, if I may, Chair. The first is, yes, I agree. The second is, and I think that's why we are working hard to keep up and strengthen the assets and regeneration performance, because I think the member's entirely right. If you don't get it up, then people lose heart. I suppose the only slight pushback or challenge I would make is that while what he says is entirely correct, actually duplication by departments doing their own thing leads to cost. It can lead to mistakes, some of which are unhelpful, and it is best that they are encouraged to stick to the process and stick to doing it the agreed way. But the reality is, he's entirely right, that can happen.
Councillor Alford, did you wish to come back?
Just very briefly to say that I agree with all of that, but it's incumbent on all of us to make sure we never get into a situation where the service departments are dissatisfied.
Thank you. Councillor Parry, you wish to make a comment?
Yeah, if I've understood the points correctly, I think one of the things I would reflect on in my role is that we are always in a large geographical area as Dorset Council, and that in itself creates challenges around management of estate and how that is serviced. But it's also the diversity of our estate. When you look at it, everything that sits under property and assets, you know, whether that's county farms or hotels in Weymouth or council depots in the north of the county or everything else, that we should never take an assumed position that one size fits all when it comes to the operation of those. As Julian's alluded to, you know, we have to show a degree of flexibility whilst working within a framework that delivers for the service requirements of our organisation and our residents.
Thank you. Councillor Fry.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for allowing me to ask the question. We're talking about property and assets here, which is obviously of considerable worth. Do we have any RAC concrete in our assets and estate at all?
Mr. Bain, very topical at the moment.
Straight at the top of my head, and I am not working directly on this, I understand that there are ongoing surveys which were commenced earlier in the summer, and I'm not aware of any problems identified to date. I stress that A, I am not personally dealing with this, but B, perhaps more importantly, this can change on a daily basis. But my understanding is that the council's on top of the process, it's making sure it surveys, and I'm certainly not aware of any closures of any buildings thus far.
Thank you. I would presume that if there is, provided there wasn't any commercial sensitivities around it, Councillor Parry, then members would be made aware at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and just to reiterate the points that have been told, the information I've received is that the initial surveys carried out on buildings that were identified by the Department for Education as being concerned, those initial surveys have not found any RAC in those premises. There will be further work going on in buildings that have the potential for it. And of course, you know, we often talk about buildings that we currently manage or we're looking to dispose of, but I'm also mindful, should we find ourselves in a position of acquisitions of any premises, that we need to ensure that those are also free of it.
Thank you. And I want to close that down because we're straying off of topic, if that's okay. Thank you. But thank you for your answer, Councillor Perry. At page 19, we talk about options appraisals, and it should include potential future need and use in the future. I believe that great weight should be afforded to that. There is a risk in financial criteria and present council priorities in the here and now, it can become too restrictive. And with the asset management process, I think it's important we don't get into a position where we get into a fire sale to achieve capital receipts in order to plug financial holes in the council budget. So I think while we look at the strategy around managing our assets and what we're going to dispose of, what we're going to repurpose and what we're going to retain, we need to be looking so far ahead. We haven't got a crystal ball, but once you've sold it, you've sold it. And the trouble in local government is we don't have the pots of money like the district council used to have back in the good old days. And so to try and achieve those assets again in the future, with the state of government funding is whoever is in control at Westminster, we know for decades that the local government funding has withered away from central government with the direction of travel that they've taken. So I'm just asking that I believe that while we're in the here and now, we must ensure that we're protecting those assets for the future for what we possibly needed and not go into that fire sale to plug budgets. Thank you.
So just to provide you some reassurance, I think I can say with absolute confidence that you're not in that. I think it is true to say that most of, if not all of your services are very conscious of assets and reuse and quite keen to be first in the consideration to be allowed to reuse assets. So I think that point is writ front and centre, Chair. I think the second thing to say is, of course, the financial case or the business case isn't solely dependent on receipt or income, but there's also a piece about cost avoidance, isn't there? And so there's cost avoidance in terms of using an asset to avoid doing something else. transporting children somewhere, or to place homeless residents or whatever. And so, the case is much more complicated than simply, can we make money by selling it? And I think, just to bring your question back to the question that was asked earlier, all of this is about coming up with your best value for money assessment. Of course, those of us old enough to remember the best value discipline, but actually was quite wise, wasn't it?
Thank you. Councillor Shortell?
Yes, I just wanted to ask a question. Of course, sometimes you're disposing of assets to avoid maintenance costs. This then becomes a two-stage process whereby you're actually disposing a particular asset in order to avoid that cost. But then, of course, there's a stage beyond that where it's sold on in order to bring in an income. And it's only when those two processes are completed do you realise the actual benefit of the sale.
Thank you, Councillor Shortell. Councillor Parry?
Thank you. A sense of agreement has broken out in the chamber, I'm delighted to say, between Scrutiny and the portfolio holder on this. Chair and Councillor Shortell, both absolutely correct in what you're saying there. If we sell a capital asset, we have one receipt for it. If we mothball an asset, yes, we retain that on our balance sheet as a capital asset, but it will have a residual, some form of residual maintenance cost to us ongoing until that is finally disposed of. Even if that is a lower cost than when it was operational. So there is a sort of a balancing act to be struck in all these situations in assessing what's the right way forward. And of course, I know people will also want to point out to me that there are mechanisms that allow you to convert a capital cost to a revenue cost, but they are relatively complex and they are not the magic answer that everybody assumes they will be. I think sometimes when you are looking at the assessment of how do you relieve pressure on revenue budgets, it's more about how you work overall and the mechanisms of which you operate, rather than necessarily sell that building, turn the cash into revenue, and all your prayers will be answered. I don't think that is actually the reality in most situations.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. So now for the awkward question, the unpopular one. Page 20. I want to know, is there a good working relationship between the asset and properties team and all of the directorates? And is the right and accurate information coming forward, do you feel? Obviously, we've got directorates that have come out of a new council authority that are trying to settle down. They've got their own enclave, as it were, and they're working and providing what they're providing for the council. So are we assured that we're not in a position where any of the directorates, and I hate to use the phrase, but I'm going to ask it anyway, any of the directorates are empire building? Are you getting the correct information through? And within the strategic document that we've got in front of us, is there sufficient safeguarding in there to prevent that from happening? And I think it's probably Councillor Parry first, I think, to take on the...
Thank you. Perhaps I best address the political question to that and then obviously allow Julian to answer any operational side of it. So in respect of working with other directorates, and you'll remember this from my time in the Children's Services Directorate, it's not just actually our internal mechanisms, it's also our external partnerships that we have to look at and consider how to make best utilisation of those. Because very often, if you can find that common ground between interested parties, then you can actually succeed in delivering transformation and delivery of improved services. And therefore, you will know I am a fierce opponent of siloed mentalities in any organisation. They do harbour progress and they do harbour the transformation work that's so required. So you will be pleased to hear that I regularly meet both formally and informally with Cabinet colleagues, and particularly those in the people directorates, to discuss ways in which we can overcome any obstacles that we've incurred and ensure that we get the outcomes that we're seeking.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. I've got a feeling you enjoyed that question. Mr. Wayne.
I think you referred to page 20, Chair, and I think the ongoing engagement and the work that people are doing together is illustrative of a growing strength of the organisation. Does Assets and Regeneration always get it right? No, of course we don't. Does the Service Department always take the right view? No, of course we don't. But I think the growing strength is evident. I think the sharing of information is much stronger. Are your protections all there yet? I would say that the new strategy is entirely focused on giving you those, because I'm not sure that it is yet, but I think the new strategy should do.
But you feel it's going in the right direction? Thank you. Okay. Could I just ask a question around, again, it's on page 20. Could you just explain the process around the asset strategy, business partners, and will they be embedded in each directorate? Are you able to give a bit more information on that? I appreciate if you can't because you were new into the post, but...
So they'll be working for Assets and Regeneration, but they will be devoted to each service. They'll be working for Assets and Regeneration, so they'll be based with them, but they'll be working for each service. Yeah, not embedded in the traditional fashion, no.
Okay. And just again, some information around that wasn't actually contained within the report, but if you could put some flesh on the bones, I'd appreciate it. And it's on page 25, who or what is the working group of public sector bodies and how's it made up and appointed, please?
So thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this is re-establishing the One Public Estate group. This is representatives, and you'll forgive me if I don't know everybody who's on it, but it's all those who deliver public services in Dorset. So it will be police, it will be Department of Work and Pensions, no doubt it'll be the parts of the health sector. And at this stage, this will be an officer group and it'll be representatives of that, of those bodies, and they will be working together to bring opportunities into the respective governance processes of those bodies.
Thank you. Okay. So in terms of repurposing, disposal, retention of our assets, what's the latest thinking on hot desk working arrangements? So we've got the strategic plan on what we're going to do and how we're going to get there, but one of the things that was driving how we're going to deal with our assets in the future was part of the thing that came out of COVID, and that was that it was going to be this new way of working, that officers would be working from home, not just in local government authorities, but in industry, in the private industry, where that was achievable. And there was lots of talking around hot desking, and massive reductions of office space. My understanding now is that the reports coming forward, some of those from government, that considers the immediate post-pandemic way of thinking has now changed, and it is more productive to get the workforce back into the office with some flexibility. And I just wondered how that's going to play within this strategy. What is the thinking within the council at the moment in terms of office retention and in terms of that view that was going to be this hot desk working? Because my understanding is now that there is a change on that from mental health issues and all those sort of things surrounding that. There's a different way of thinking now.
So, Chair, I think the answer to the direct and shortest answer to your question is developing. I made reference in my remarks to the utilisation study, understanding the use of workspaces currently. I've also mentioned the employee survey to understand the current and future workplace needs of employees. And clearly we need to take into the results of those studies into account, together with anything else that may be emerging nationally in a policy piece. So I think you'll find that the short answer to your question is there will be further discussion to follow, because I don't think that position is yet clear.
Yeah, I think it's a developing feast. Yeah, Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate probably Councillor Haynes, as the Cabinet member with workforce, would probably be the best person to answer on this point. But if I can offer my perspective on it, with your indulgence, I think the key in that word is flexibility. And, you know, we have tried to the max over the last 3 years of the pandemic and everything else, the concepts of working remotely, working from home, working out of home in some cases. From my own perspective, the last thing I want to see is somebody drive halfway across the county to clock into County Hall to then drive halfway back to their territory in order to carry out their day's work. That's nonsensical. It incurs cost to the council, and environmentally it's hazardous as well. I think actually a more mature approach is that we have some faith in our staff to carry out their work diligently. The evidence is that they can do that, and they have been doing that successfully wherever possible. But I'm very conscious also that there is something additional to be gained by bringing people into that workspace environment physically as well as just remotely. It does seem to have, in terms of a knowledge and a camaraderie amongst colleagues, a real purpose to it. So we need to ensure that happens. In terms of hot desking space, you're quite right, and we're all party to this ourselves in our work as councillors. There are times where you just need a desk and a chair and be able to log on to your work and crack on for something. Maybe you've got to log on to a call somewhere else or something of that nature, and we need to make that facility available to all our staff and make it as easy as possible for them to, of course, book those facilities. That strikes me as a very pragmatic way for us to go forward. Where could this possibly lead if you were to fast forward, say, 10 years? Well, it's entirely possible that there may be, we find ourselves with a surplus estate inside the County Hall building if that is truly effective, and that may create an opportunity for us to find revenue elsewhere.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Other members? Councillor Canning.
Thank you, Chair. First, I just wanted to start off by saying I really welcomed a lot of what you said today. I think it's particularly been a concern of mine and many other councillors about the lack of involvement of councillors in decision making. And it is welcome to hear your clear statements that you do want to see members really involved. And I think one of the worst things when you're a local member is to be told some development that's going on in your ward and find out about it in the newspapers first before you hear from it from officials at the council itself. So, I mean, you're saying that that's something we want to avoid and you want to use members' knowledge is really welcome. I think particularly in a department where, well, it's true so much of the council, isn't it, that where staff turnover is very high, I think there's a real potential threat towards corporate memory, that information and data is lost because there are very large, people being replaced every few months by other people who may not be familiar with the area at all. Whereas, on the other hand, there's a group of people through the councillors who often have very long memories going back decades, working on projects and buildings and are able to know what can and can't be done. And I just wondered, is there actually a practical way of ensuring that your officers do actually consult? Is there a sort of tick box approach whereby we can go to them, or you can go to them and say, have you actually spoken to the local member, rather than just taking on your word? But I'm sure I don't know your commitment, but I just want to know: is there a practical way to make it more automatic?
So I think, Chairman, there is an element of making sure that the steps are filled in on a tick box approach. I think, quite frankly, training, managerial reminders is probably the core and the key. I think this is one where you know how they say the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. I think this is one where making sure this gets done is eternal vigilance as well. So I think it is a constant thing to keep working at. It should be natural, but it isn't always when people are busy. I think it's one you just have to keep working at. But I think the important thing is where it is inadequate, then I think we need feedback to make sure we do it better.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chair. And in response to Councillor Canning, I think you raised a very fair point there, which is, of course, things like how do we look at continuity of that corporate knowledge and how do we plan succession planning effectively? Well, that must be one of our key aims as our desire to be an employer of choice. You know, we want people to come and work for our organisation in the same way we want people who decide to leave the organisation to leave in good terms and ensure that their knowledge is passed on. We can all think of our favourite corporate directors, and I can think of one in particular in place who has served here for many years, and would be a travesty if his particular knowledge of in-depth knowledge from everything from building Weymouth Relief Road onwards were to be lost inside the organisation. So I hope we pay heedance to the need to ensure that we how can I put this kindly, we really do need to plunder their brains for all their knowledge and ensure that that is somewhere written down, because history does have a habit of repeating itself, and it'd be nice to be able to fast track to the answers that they of course will have.
Earlier in the meeting, we discussed about the new cloud base, the property database, and we told it's on track for October 2023, just next month. Will members be able to access that, or is it just for officer operational?
I have to be honest, I don't know the answer to that question, so I'll come back to you. Normally, I wouldn't have thought so, but I do need to check.
That's fine, thank you. Okay, members, has anybody else got anything else they wish to say? Not at this point, no? So if we take that cloud base, I think one of the things that's come out of it for me in moving forward is the ability for members to actually know what's going on. So we've got the strategic report in front of us with an asset management plan, and the officers know what's going on and they know what they're doing, and the report's looking really good. I'm not quite sure that members know what's going on, and it's how to convey that to members. We can't have a report coming to this committee with all of the assets, with all the repurposes, the disposals and everything. The report is going to be massive because the estate of Dorset Council is so large. So I'm wondering, members, how you feel about whether or not we had so much success with webinars during the COVID period, and about whether officers could formulate webinars to keep members informed. We always said we were going to be a member-led authority. We were always promised that members would have an insight into what was happening within the assets within the council, whether that was within your own wards. And we all know that there are assets that are just outside of your wards that are critically important to the residents that you serve. So if officers are able to produce it, would members be inclined to ask from this committee that we have webinars in future on a regular basis concerning what's happening with assets?
Thank you, Chair. I think that's a very, very good idea. The only concern I would have is we've seen the numbers of members on webinars dropping off quite considerably, so it would need to be a couple of dates. But I think that's a really good idea, some good headline stuff. Don't want to get into too much detail, so this is the amount of assets we got, you know, this is the amount of like leases we got, or whatever. Just some headline figures and some report behind those headline figures. Because if you make it too detail-y, you'll get into the weeds again, and you'll never get out of the weeds, like, you know. But I think it needs something to let members know what kind of assets we got and what the value of them are, and what we're doing in disposal, and how long along the track are we in disposing or saying we're going to keep those assets.
Thank you, Councillor Canning.
Yes, with a different hat on as my role as the deputy leader of the Lib Dem group. I would just like to say, I think it's a key thing that's part of the induction course for both for new members and for members who are re-elected. There's something like this report today, explaining the strategy, what we're trying to achieve, is a key part of getting members and newly elected members up to speed on what's going on. I think that would be very useful.
Thank you, Councillor Canning. Councillor Parry. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. In response to Councillor Andrews and Councillor Canning, absolutely, in terms of new member induction, I can remember arriving as the new county councillor back in 2016 and having to have things explained to me, like the fact that our roads were deemed to be an asset When you are a ward councillor, you think they are nothing but a liability, as you have to campaign to get them resurfaced and the potholes filled. But I do understand that, and there's an awful lot about the complexities of local government that need to be understood, and our range of our portfolio that we hold in property and assets needs to be understood as well. Some of those, for example, are held for continuity basis, and they may seem dormant at the moment in time, but they do have purpose in case of emergency, as indeed has been proven during the pandemic. In terms of webinars, yes, I'm very happy to have those. I've already had brief discussions with officers. Do bear with us on that, where we've just had this little change in Pete leaving the organisation and others been stepping up. But we will hold those. The other thing I would favour, and I certainly ran in the children's services, was a sort of informal cluster meetings with councillors, cross-party councillors in particular areas, which I found very effective and we did in the Sherborne area, as you'll recall, where we found that certain information at that sort of granular level as a ward member was able to be escalated up to the cabinet member and on to officers beyond, and that proved very effective, I know, and I'm grateful for you, those that took part in them, so I'll look to replicate that in the Police Directorate soon.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. So I think so from members are happy for that to become a recommendation? Yeah, okay. And members, in terms of the property strategy and asset management plan report that you've had in front of you, do you feel that you've had assurance that you feel that the asset management is being conducted in the right manner and we've got the right processes in place now? Are members happy with that? Yeah? Okay. So, Ms Watson, do you have anything you wish to add? No?
I mean, as you said, there was just a couple of points which officers were going to give some further information on following the meeting, so I can work with them to get that information to the committee following the meeting.
Thank you. Mr Way.
Just for the avoidance of doubt, I've got can you access TechForge and the appointment of public intelligence. I've got, can members access TechForge and the details on the appointment of public intelligence? Who and how? Those are two items. Yep. Yep.
Okay, well, Councillor Took.
Just very brief and going back a little bit to the RAAC concrete. We talked about these problems in Dorset Council properties. It's not just schools, but for example, academies. Do we know if there's any in any of our local academies? And if an academy becomes unable to continue, does any liability from that academy then devolve back down to Dorset Council?
Before, can you just make it as brief as possible? I feel we're slightly off of agenda. So I appreciate the concern and the questions to be asked, but if you just make it as brief as possible, because we're slightly off agenda as far as I'm concerned.
Certainly. In terms of advice to academies, again, one of the learnings I know the Children's Directorate found during the pandemic was that very often the academies, and in fact the independent schools, were turning to us for advice on a matter of such gravitas that they just simply didn't have the experience to necessarily unpick the minefield of legislation and requirements that were coming down the line from Whitehall about it. And I suspect we will see the same around the building structures in this case. I am mindful that should academies ultimately fail, there are circumstances in which properties have been returned to us. The boarding houses at Shaftesbury, for example, are currently in the process of being transitioned back to council ownership, and those will be inspected, and we will understand the circumstances and structure and stability of those buildings when they do. I'm not suggesting for one moment that there's any suspicion that they do have rack in them, but you know, that's the sort of due diligence that you would expect us to undertake as part of the process.
Okay, thank you. So just to tidy things up, some of the things that came out that I've listed was the report from the consultants of public intelligence that we're going to check to see whether that members get access to that. The hot desk and remote working is being reviewed with regards to future office accommodation. The strategic plan needs to ensure that duplication isn't taking place, but the authority needs to have some flexibility. and we're going to check the cloud members, the cloud-based members access. Webinar future on asset and properties to inform members. Future webinars to inform members on the assets.
And induction as well. And should be part of the induction process.
Yeah, sorry, and induction. Yeah. So Miss Watson will have the list of the other things that were made. Does anybody else wish to add anything at this point? No? So we're happy with that? Okay, so Mr. Wayne, thank you ever so much for your report that you've given, your presentation, and the questions you've answered. I really appreciate it. Can you go back to your team and thank your team on behalf of Scrutiny as well for the work that they're doing? And Councillor Parry, as always, thank you very much for your professional input as well. Thank you. Okay, members. So we're going to move on to agenda item 8, the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee Work Programme, and Miss Watson will run us through that. Thank you.
So committee, just briefly, page 30 of your agenda lists items currently on the work programme for your next meeting, which is the 9th of November. The chairman, vice chairman and myself are also working with officers around a potential item on tourism, which came out of your informal work programme session a couple of months ago. So that may be added to that meeting as well. So if there's any questions about that.
No, members are happy? Councillor Andrews?
Sorry, I lost my screen then, so I wasn't concentrating on what Ms Watson was saying. But this is our programme we're talking about now. Page 30. Everything went off. Sorry. I was just, do we need to talk about the parking issue in the future, or is that in the plan we're going to look at?
Okay, so Cabinet referred parking back to scrutiny. We haven't confirmed the timeline of that at the moment, but as you know, what will come back to scrutiny, what for us to consider will be whether or not it's not the parking charges themselves that will be taking place within the budget settings, with those budget discussions in terms of charges. And what we will be scrutinising is whether the policy that was in place and the charges that were made, whether they are achieving the outcomes that were expected of them. Okay, but we're not sure of the timeline of when that is coming to committee. Okay. Sorry, Councillor Took.
When that does come to us, are we going to be able to have people from the affected towns who are saying that they're having problems with trade? Are they going to be able to come and tell us about their experience, or are we just talking to officers?
There is a public participation section within our committee meeting, so yes, the public can come and speak, yes. I see no reason why not. Thank you. Okay, if I move now to...
I don't know if there's any...
Sorry, yeah. So... Yes, so to move to members to ask if any members has got anything they wanted to raise over the performance dashboard. Does any member have anything they wish to raise at this point? It's not for discussion now, but is there any concerns around the performance dashboard? Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, I know we're going to discussion about that, because Mr Bonner's going to come up in a minute. I think so. But are we going to have another session prior to the next meeting to look at performance? Going to book one in? Okay, fine. I'll leave it to that.
Yeah, Councillor Andrews, yeah. Mr Bonner will be here and we do the performance dashboard in the next scrutiny meeting as per normal. Thank you. So if I move to agenda item 9, the Cabinet Forward Plan, and Ms Watson to run us through that.
So councillors, you have the Cabinet Forward Plan. You also have the decisions from the last meeting in July. These are on your agenda so that you can see what reports are coming up to Cabinet, what they've been looking at and what decisions they've been taking. So if there's anything on there that you would want to take a look at some point, this is your sort of opportunity to have a look and see what Cabinet have been taking decisions on.
Okay, does any member have anything they wish to raise at the moment? Councillor Shortell?
I did have a word with the Chief Executive a few months ago about parking at County Hall. and he said that something would be sorted out by September, or mostly at the end of September now, and I was just wondering if we could incorporate that in perhaps a future item.
Thank you, Councillor Shortell. Yeah, well, it's not Cabinet. It is by way of explaining why this committee was 5 minutes late starting due to the problems there with members parking. It wasn't easy this morning. In fact, there was a major road closure in Dorchester, didn't help, but yes, parking is an issue, and I assure you I will be speaking to the leader myself as well after this morning's events. Briefly, Councillor Shortell.
He did say he'd introduce a ticket system whereby tickets would be issued to members of staff to allocate their parking areas. Just a thought in passing.
Thank you, Councillor Shortell. Councillor Andrews, did I see you wish to raise something? Councillor Andrews?
Yeah, you certainly did. The Cabinet made a decision on housing. A good report came on housing, and they talked about a housing board. So I think we need to have some kind of discussion around the housing board and how the makeup of that housing board is going to take place, etc. Whether it's going to be cross-party, whether it's going to be involve professionals from housing, housing associations, etc. So I would just like to know how that housing board is going to be made up.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. We can have a discussion with the portfolio holder and the officers in charge surrounding that. I suspect it will probably need to, with the current constitution within the council, overview, be working that up, and then at some point in the future, I assume we will review that as a scrutiny process. But we'll have that conversation, see whether they want to do any pre-scrutiny on that, but I haven't been made aware of it. Thank you. Okay, so thank you, members. I'll move to agenda item 10, urgent items. You'll be relieved to hear there aren't any. And agenda item 11, exempt business. And again, you'll be thrilled to hear that there isn't any. So I'm going to let you all go early, okay? I don't know if there's rugby on this afternoon or not, but enjoy your afternoon. Thank you, members. Thank you, officers. Thank you, Councillor Shortell. So I'll close the meeting. Thank you.